listening to the broadcast on the Focalizer Network, the only show that covers all your favorite fandoms, with your host, Justin Thomas.
The pirate genre has been done, right? We've had so many movies and maybe a few television shows, but the point is, they've been done, so why bother? Well, let's think about it for a moment. The pirate movies that have saturated the market for the last decade, Pirates of the Caribbean, and before that Hook and Peter Pan, those films certainly have their appeal and place in entertainment value, but how about we get a real gritty pirate story, one that you don't watch with the kids? Maybe instead of Jack Sparrow or Captain Hook, we can get a pirate version of Deadwood. Well, we have it, and actually we have had it for a while now, and we're finally going to talk about it. This is the Focalizer Podcast Network. I'm your host, Justin Thomas, and this is our Black Sails Series Review. I found Black Sails a little over a year ago and immediately fell in love with the series. I binge-watched Season 1 and 2 just in time to start Season 3 as it aired. I don't know why I hadn't found the series earlier, but I don't seem to be the only one. I've just published a blog actually on vocalizershow.com that addresses the lack of attention Black Sails has received from content creators. Even though the series does have a sizable fandom and actually premiered on YouTube, it does surprisingly still receive close to zero attention from YouTube and iTunes content creators. My hope is to give you guys an in-depth, full series review that this fantastic show deserves, even though at the time of this recording it only has 2 episodes left in the series, but better late than never. And Hulu has just picked up the series, so hopefully I'll inspire some of you that haven't already found the series to make time for this truly wonderful story. Part 1, Setting the Scene. Black Sails Season 1, Episode 1 starts off in the year 1715 in the West Indies. The pirates of New Providence Island, the Bahamas, threaten maritime trade in the region. The laws of every civilized nation declare the pirates enemies of mankind. Before we get into the details of Season 1 of Black Sails, which itself is a interesting mixture of a fictional prequel to a fictional story, set within a true-to-history piece, including historical events with historical figures interacting with fictional characters. I think the best way to put it is, Black Sails has elegantly placed itself in a world that lays in between fact and fiction. But that's a story for another time. Right now, I'd like to provide the audience with a little context, an effort to properly set the stage for this story that takes place in what is known as the Golden Age of Piracy, where former privateers turned to piracy to find the Urca de Lima gold, which, in fact, was a real part of the 1715 treasure fleet. In this first part of my introduction to the series, we'll focus on the historical period in which it is set, and we'll go over the important historical events and historical figures that play a role in this series. Now, like I mentioned before, this series has placed itself in an interesting spot that lays between fact and fiction. So following this cast, I'll be addressing the other side of this fascinating story, the fictional side, where we will cover the Treasure Island connection. But for this part of the introduction, we're just going to stick to the facts. So what I really hope to accomplish with this is to set the scene for you guys, give you guys a better idea of the political atmosphere during this time and just overall what's going on, so you can have a better idea of why our characters are doing what they do, why they go down the paths they go down, to just have a better understanding of what life was like back then, especially since it's constantly being called the Golden Age of Piracy. The Golden Age of Piracy is a common name given to outbursts of piracy in the maritime history during the early modern period. The broadest accepted definition of the Golden Age of Piracy spans from the 1650s to the 1730s, and it actually covers 3 separate outbursts of piracy. But before anyone called it the Golden Age of anything, they just would have known the time leading up to and influencing the events of Black Sails, 1702 to 1713, as a time of war. More specifically, Queen Anne's War, also known as the War of Spanish Succession. I will have a link below for anybody who's interested in further knowledge of this conflict. The most important thing that you need to know about this conflict is its effect that it had on the world, and more specifically the transatlantic trade and the characters that we will be seeing in Black Sails. The vast majority of the characters we see at the start of Black Sails Season 1 are obviously what would be known as pirates at the time, but I'd like to shine a light on the fact that a large portion of pirates at this time, immediately following the end of the succession, were often previous sailors, and a lot of these sailors would have been known as privateers, who learned their skills during their time served in the War of the Spanish Succession, aka Queen Anne's War. If that sounds familiar to you, it's most likely where Blackbeard's name for his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, comes from. And when this war ended, it was ended by a treaty in 1713, almost 1714. Many of the sailors were relieved of duty and left unemployed in the trade-rich Caribbean. This left a large number of skilled and enthusiastic sailors as a labor pool for pirates to draw recruits from. Now, a really important thing to note is, as a part of this war settlement, Britain attained the asiento. My Spanish is not strong. It means seat in English, but it's a Spanish government contract to supply slaves to Spain's New World colonies, providing British traders and smugglers more access to the traditionally closed Spanish markets in America. The arrangement also contributed heavily to the spread of piracy across the Western Atlantic at this time. This pretty much ended the time of Britain having a lax approach to the act of so-called piracy. What you have to understand is, before this, Britain famously, in fact, especially if you want to take a look into, which again I will be providing all my source information links in the description box below, but Henry Morgan, Captain Morgan, everybody knows Captain Morgan. This is just an example of how they kind of treated piracy at the beginning of the golden age of piracy in the mid 1600s. And he did all sorts of like crazy stuff. Like he committed a lot of crimes, a lot of times without the official licensing, which we'll get into in a minute. Just an example is he raided Panama and burned cities to the ground and was summoned back to England for supposedly a trial. And he left being knighted by Charles II and became governor of Jamaica after that. So yeah, as soon as they started making money off the trade routes in the transatlantic, they stopped supporting piracy. So this is the time that we're dealing with when we come up to Black Sails. Piracy is no longer a profitable business. It's not worth them risking their slave trade money. Next thing I want to talk about is the difference between a privateer or a pirate, and even more so how the people, the men and women of this time, were seen, what they were seen as. Are they savages, or simply the product of their own environment, or a little bit of both? In my opinion, it's usually a little bit of both. It's up to you what you want to think about them. But the one connection I always make to pirates, for the 20th century at least, is the Hells Angels. I like to see them as the Hells Angels of the sea, and here's why. Shipping to the colonies boomed simultaneously with the flood of skilled mariners after this war. That's where I draw the similarities between pirates and the outlaw bikers. Much like the aftermath of World War II and Vietnam War, which gave life to the famous outlaw biker gangs such as Hells Angels and Vigilantes, etc., etc. The Spanish Succession gave a similar generation of war-torn men and women, faced with a lack of opportunity, for those obtaining a skill set that they have mastered during wartime, not only to stay alive, but for the welfare of their own country and people. Now these skill sets are suddenly deemed immoral, illegal, and only performed by savages. What I cannot stress enough is how thin of a line it is between the life of a privateer and a pirate. It was literally paper thin, and I mean this in the most literal sense. The legality of the actual action of piracy depended solely on the possession of what was called the letter of the mark. See, the post-Spanish succession period is unique from the previous buccaneering and privateering eras in that it follows an arc of legal, semi-legal, and fully illegal piracy. While the early privateers carried letters of marque signed by the respective leaders, like Captain Morgan did, the buccaneers helped the European powers really colonize the West Indies through stealth and semi-legal authorization, again, like Captain Morgan. The Spanish succession period, it was a time of relative peace, and like I said, Britain was making money off the trade. So the stability in the world made these pirates outlaws, and yet, even in 1715, outlaws had an appeal, and their stories became famous, just like the way we idolize the biker gangs of the 20th century. Example in Hollywood, Sons of Anarchy, so on. In an interview with Sonny Barger, former president of the Hells Angels, he gave this befitting analogy. Outlaw bikers view themselves as nothing less than frontier heroes, living out the freedom ethic they feel the rest of society has largely abandoned. Pirates became pirates for the simple reason of wanting freedom. They mutinied against oppressive and abusive captains and gained their freedom by force. They also considered themselves the police of the sea. They took it upon themselves to free abused sailors. While the rest of the world considered pirates to be the villains, they considered themselves the only fair system in place to protect the ocean. Pirates lived on the fringe of society and considered themselves to be some kind of heroes. Outlaw bikers might not own the road, but they do consider it to be theirs and treat it as such. Realistically, the similarities between pirates and biker gangs only go so far. Strictly speaking, they both steal and fence goods and make money off the government illegally that way, or just make money illegally in general, and there is a heightened sense of brotherhood between the members than you would see in a normal organization. But I know it's probably not much of a surprise for a 30-year-old man like myself to be obsessed with history, but I definitely have found a new passion when I've been researching for this podcast, and I would love to talk about all of, from the early stages on, great stories about Caesar being captured by Sicilian pirates and talking his way out of this and telling them that he was going to come back and kill each and every one of them, and his promise came back and crucified every single one of these pirates. But we are going to stick to the script and stay to Black Sails, which we were focusing on. But I just want to say that I think that's what makes this series so great, is it does embrace it does a pretty good job of staying true to the historical period. And I will also be linking all this source material that I'm using and the links below. So if anybody wants to do further reading on it. So let's get back to the script. The specific period that we are seeing at the start of Black Sails is the post-Spanish Succession period. It was the major period of piracy during the Golden Age of piracy. It's the most commonly thought of period when people think of pirates, many which we are about to meet in our story, such as Edward Blackbeard Teach, Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, and the rest of what was known. They don't call this in the show, but they were actually known as the Flying Gang. It's not as catchy as the Hells Angels. In its time, it must have sounded fierce considering those who were known to be among them. Overall, it's one of the most represented periods in piracy and popular culture, and one of the most heavily romanticized. Even when the percentage of known naval veterans amongst pirates does dramatically drop, which it does do a few years after the war, the number of pirates sailing the Atlantic doesn't drop. This is believed to be due to the widespread tales of pirate legend that circulated to both Europe and the Americas during these pirates' own lifetime, which, when you think about how long they lived, that's pretty amazing. And there wasn't Twitter, so that's pretty crazy. I mean, Blackbeard, Edward Teach, he was a pirate for 2 years. 2 years. He had a very short career, but a very, very impactful career. So they prided themselves on this. They spread the legend. This wasn't by accident. So they wanted to raise the black and board a ship without a fight. Installing fear into the general population was in their favor. The next character I want to talk about is not a person. It's a place. And it's, in my opinion, one of the main characters, if not the main character of this story, and it's Nassau, aka the Republic of the Pirates. I'll give you a little bit of background on Nassau here, which was part of what was called New Providence Island back then. But the Republic of Pirates from 1706 to 1718 housed former privateers and infamous pirates from the Flying Gang created at Nassau on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas that lasted about 11 years between 1706 and 1718. During the post-Spanish Succession period, the Republic of Pirates was governed by the Code of Conduct, which was akin to the Pirate Code, and would last until the blockade of Nassau in 1718, when Governor Woodes Rogers arrived delivering the 1718 King's pardon. The Republic of Pirates was able to develop in the Bahamas to the lack of any population along with constant European war. The area had been home to pirates since at least 1696, when the infamous pirate Henry Avery sailed his ship, the Fancy, in the port following the capture of, I'm going to just totally botch this word, but Ganji Swai, in the first subsequent international manhunt after him. Despite the British authorities actively pursuing Avery, he was able to find safe refuge in the Bahamas under Governor Nicholas Trout. And Avery is going to come up in our story as well. So you just have these massive legends of the time, like Avery and Jennings and Hornigold, like we're about to talk about. And I mean, just simply put, Nassau was established by a man that escaped the whole British fleet and made a life on not a beautiful island at the time, not the resort island that we know Nassau to be today, but what they made into home. So it's just fascinating, these stories of, again, ex-Navy here with Avery, but outsmarting the fleet and just having these epic adventures. This place that we're going to call home for Black Sails is this Republic of Pirates that was established by Avery and Hornigold and Henry Jenny, Thomas Barrow. This would be the beginning of what I was talking about with the flying gang. That means Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, Calico Jack Rackham, Charles Vane, several famous and iconic pirates. For example, Hornigold was the mentor to Edward Teach Blackbeard, who would later go on. And Henry Jennings would be the mentor to the famous Charles Vane, as well as Calico Jack Rackham. And indirectly with Mary Read, who is not in the story, unfortunately, but Anne Bonny, who is. Despite Nassau having some internal conflicts, it was successful, and thousands of people, including pirates, merchants, prostitutes, and more, flocked to the new pirate haven at Nassau. At one point, the governor of Bermuda remarked that there was over 1,000 pirates in Nassau, and that they vastly outnumbered the inhabitants of the town. Eventually, Blackbeard would be elected to run the Republic of Pirates, and he took on the position of magistrate. So our home island of Nassau, in real life, had Blackbeard as a magistrate for a little bit. So, like I said, all these characters that I'm mentioning come up in the series. Most of them, they stay pretty true to historical accounts, and some, they stray a little bit, but for the most part, it's all very, very entertaining, and Nassau itself is fascinating. When we look at the economics of Nassau, what we have is we have families and clans at the time. The Guthrie clan is what is represented as pretty much the head of Nassau commerce, at least. And the Guthrie clan was a real Scottish clan that did do trade on the island. They weren't the head of the island like portrayed in the show, but they definitely took from history as much as they could, and we have the Guthrie family. What they would do is they would have the pirates bring back the goods. They would take the goods, they would fence the goods to legitimate merchants, and then they would give the pirates a percentage. So a lot of different types of people were interacting with each other, a lot of different classes of people, and it's a very, very interesting mix. And you could say Nassau is the main character of this show to a point, and the main source of wealth, which also is pretty true to fact. The show actually stays pretty true to fact with this main source of wealth for Nassau, and you could say that it's a plot line that is still going as the series is coming to an end, is the plundered treasure that funded Nassau from the 1715 Spanish treasure fleet. And this comes up in the show actually quite a bit. In real history, the Spanish treasure fleet had been a target of piracy for almost a century at this point, probably about 70 years. But the Spanish treasure fleet was the main source of plunder for all pirates. And it does come up heavily in this show because the survival of Nassau is just as much of the main storyline as the origins of our Treasure Island characters. As we start to close up at least this cast, I will talk a little bit about the overall plot, just so you give an idea about who these people are you're hearing about, that you've just heard about, and what type of role they play in this story. Of course, like I said, the second part of this will be covering the Treasure Island connection, and what I mean by that is Black Sails is a prequel of sorts, and more so than a prequel, the Treasure Island, it's an origin story of Long John Silver and the actual story of Captain Flint, who kind of just looms over the story of Treasure Island, and you hear he's almost like a main character himself, but really hear anything specific about Flint in the book. All you know is he played a pivotal role in the early life of Long John Silver, major events that took place, but you never know what they are, and so this story is kind of telling those. In these real-life pirates, all that I've mentioned in this real-life scenario of Bahamas and the Spanish Succession, Queen Anne's War, and so on, all play into this atmosphere that these characters are coming up in. All these real-life pirates are featured in this series, and they play pivotal roles, especially Charles Vane and Calico Jack Rackham and Anne Bonny, and we even get Blackbeard. So it's a really, really interesting story, and It's the story really of Captain Flint. We learn about who he was, and we get the origin story of Long John Silver. We see a young John Silver, so that's how it starts off. So, I mean, we're going to talk about it as we do the series review, and I'll talk about these characters more so in the second half of this introduction, but I just wanted to paint a picture for those of you that haven't seen it, or those of you that are watching it right now and maybe are going to binge watch it again on Hulu. And I wanted to shine a little light on it because this is an excellent series. And I will finish off here by just giving a little bit of information on what's to come. The next episode will be coming up very shortly, a few days, and it'll just be the Treasure Island connection, which will include the Treasure Island characters that make an appearance in this, which is actually, there is quite a few, and including Billy Bones, Flint, and Silver, and so on, and many others. And we will be diving a little bit more into the narrative and how that plays. I guess the best way to kind of explain how they kind of piece this crazy, very ambitious venture that John Steinberg and Robert Levine, the creators, did when they put the show together. In an interview with them, when I was doing research, I heard them make this comment. I think it was Jonathan that said, creating Black Sails is like launching a little mini rocket into the sky and having it try to land in one single little book that doesn't want it in it anyways, meaning the book would be Treasure Island, and they're writing a story to fit in it that is trying to reject it at all costs. But it's very, very, very ambitious project. Like I said, I am just surprised that it wasn't picked up by more content creators, especially when we literally lick our chops when a new show is about to come out. I'm a little bit new to this, but when something's gonna be coming out that lends itself to theory crafting and the fandoms that like to blog, like to watch multiple YouTube videos and recaps on and breakdowns of every single episode. What I mean by that is like Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, Westworld, Vikings, so on. It's a little surprising this wasn't covered more, or really at all. I definitely can only think of two casts that have done it well. And it's just a little bit surprising when, like I said, I'm new to this a little bit, but we do sit around and we anticipate when shows are going to be coming out. Like, we got American Gods that are coming out, and I don't know any content creators that aren't like looking forward to it and haven't been preparing, which I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. That's what you do. The show is going to lend itself to the fandoms that follow YouTube channels and podcasts and shows that lend themselves to, further discussion, theory crafting, shows that people are going to want to watch the reviews and recaps. And all I'm saying is we're aware of when things are coming out that are going to be show worthy or cast worthy. And Black Sails is more than show or cast worthy. It's definitely a great, great show. And it has its flaws, but what doesn't? And we'll talk about that in episode reviews, but which I figure we will do after this second half of the introduction, which will be coming out in the next few days. What I'll do is I'll start doing the episode reviews for the series. So for the first season that has about 8 episodes, I will run 3 and 3 for the first 2. So 3 episodes in the first segment and then 3 episodes in the second segment. And then I'll do the final 2 episodes of season 1 for the third, and then move on to season 2 and adjust it accordingly. And also, I will be doing a short little cast for the last 2 episodes. Hopefully, this will be coming out on the Saturday before the second to last, if everything goes accordingly. But again, go and watch it on Hulu. Catch up. You still got time, technically. And make sure to support the channel. Go to focalizershow.com and read some of the wonderful blogs that are going to be posted up there. Hopefully, by the time that this comes out, we just launched the site. I know I got my first Black Sails one on there. I will be doing a blog for every episode. And make sure to like and subscribe. And we want to hear your comments. We want to know what you like, what you don't like, and everything else. What you want to hear about, what you don't want to hear about, what you thought was stupid. We're trying to give you guys content that is a little bit different.